Hey, what's up guys, it's Nick2, and today I wanted to show you guys a pretty much near perfected version of a Pulverize Druid build, which is definitely one of the best Druid builds in the entire game right now. You can absolutely blast your T100 Nightmare Dungeons, pretty much one-shotting most elites when you actually get an overpower proc. You can absolutely annihilate bosses, maybe not like 4-man Duriel, Hoda Barb type damage, but you can do some pretty insane damage against bosses once you have the build set up perfectly. And I just kind of wanted to show you guys what the final form of this build really ends up looking like, and go over with you why I think this is one of the best builds in the game. The gameplay kind of speaks for itself. Pulverize kind of has this weird thing where it just feels really good to press, and it's just a lot of fun playing with the build. I personally haven't played with Pulverize before, so this was a ton of fun. It's definitely one of the better setups for Druid, if not the best setup for Druid to get all the way up to level 100 with, and to start farming out a lot of gear. Once you're level 100, I think this is probably the second best Druid build. I haven't played with Tornado yet, at least I haven't played with it since the first season. I do think Tornado ends up being a little bit better than this, and it may perhaps end up being better for the Abattoir of Zir, but this is definitely a close second, if not probably the best, and it is a ton of fun to play. I'll probably end up posting a Tornado video, so let me know down below if you guys are interested in that. But Tornado does get a little bit boring, and this build is a ton of fun to play with, so I'm really excited to show it to you guys. Before I get into things, I want to give a big thanks to today's sponsor, Omni Heroes, an epic fantasy strategy RPG that's been globally recommended on both the App Store and Google Play. Omni Heroes offers a large variety of content for players. As Omni Guardians, you can summon hundreds of intricately designed heroes, unlock tons of synergies, and create hundreds of different team compositions at will, with a whopping 17 unique synergies and over 100 team comps. There's a ton of depth for those of you that enjoy engaging strategy, but the game also offers casual and relaxed gameplay for people who kind of just want to chill out, such as the quick battle feature that lets automated mechanics take over so you guys don't have to stress and you can just pop in and claim your rewards whenever you want. Now is a great time to hop into Omni Heroes, as there's a new season coming out November 17th called Ash and Phantom, with a brand new storyline as well as a new roguelike game mode which will offer awesome new gameplay opportunities. And if you haven't already downloaded the game, now is a great time, because if you download using my link, you'll get 2 rounds of 777 free summons, including 5 legendary heroes into your roster within the first week, so make sure to download using the link in the description or scanning the QR code on screen. Alright, getting into the build, there's actually a good amount of small little things that you can change here and there when it comes to skills, spirit boons, vampire powers, etc. Overall, I've tested a crazy amount of them, and this is what I've landed on as being the most versatile, but I will give you guys those options because some things are a little bit preferential. The core of the build is basically just using Pulverize, scaling its damage as high as humanly possible, and scaling overpower damage, as you can get a lot of rotating guaranteed overpower procs, which are going to do a lot of damage. Without overpowering, your damage is not going to be high enough to do things like tier 100s and actually one-shot bosses, hitting up for 40-50 million. Without overpower, it's not really going to be possible, because you can scale overpower's damage so significantly now, and because it actually works, and also Banished Lord's Talisman giving you a massive multiplier here. Overpowering is very important. By default, Pulverize isn't an insane skill, but taking advantage of the Shockwave legendary on a two-hander, as well as turning it into an Earth skill for some additional synergies, makes it a pretty good skill overall, and you can get a lot of guaranteed overpowers, which are pretty much the crux of the build, just rotating between these. First of all, there is the next every 12 seconds, you will have a guaranteed overpower just with Pulverize by default. Next to that, there's the Banished Lord's Talisman. After spending 300 of your primary resource, your next skill will guaranteed overpower. You have the Spirit Boon. Every 20th kill, your next Earth skill will overpower. And then you also have the Provocation. Every 16 seconds, your next non-defensive skill will overpower. Also have the Vampire Power. Every 20 seconds, your next skill will overpower, which typically I think is pretty bad, but because all of your ways of overpowering is basically just guaranteed ones all on different timers, it's actually good to have as many of these opportunities as possible, and you kind of just want to spam out your Pulverizes, just hoping for an overpower, and once you overpower, it'll do a lot of damage. Personally, I'm not a big fan of this rotating damage thing, a lot of your attacks not doing anything, and then some attacks doing a lot of damage, but the overall damage output that you'll end up getting as a result of this is simply just too good to pass up, so that's how we end up playing with the build. When it comes to our other skills, there's a good bit of options here. As you can see, I have 3 companions. I'll talk about that in a second. The 2 skills that I would pretty much never replace under any circumstance would be Blood Howl and Petrify. I guess you could replace Petrify, but Petrify is very good against bosses to guarantee those one-shots. You get 50% increased crit damage multi, which is unbelievably very strong. For general clearing, it's not that good because it's a very long cooldown. Not using Grizzly Rage with this build. Grizzly Rage breaks a lot of synergies and things that work with the build. I've really tried to lean into it. Also, the Grizzly Rage Legendary giving you crit damage is not multiplicative, so it just isn't really a damage increase. So going into Grizzly Rage for this build, I don't think is actually good. Blood Howl is really good because it heals you. It also counts as a defensive skill, so you get damage reduction up permanently. It works with one of our legendary Paragon nodes for spirit cost reduction, and every time you press it, you get 20 spirit. Also, using a defensive skill fortifies you, so spamming Blood Howl is very, very good. Otherwise, for your next 3 skills, you have a lot of options. As you can see, I have 3 companions on, and the reason for this is because I'm using this legendary where you get 10% increased damage for each active companion. In total, I have 2 wolves, 3 ravens, as well as 1 poison creeper, so this ends up being 60% multiplicative damage that is active almost all of the time, and it is very easy to take advantage of. However, another way to play with the build is to use the natural balance legendary, where anytime you cast a storm skill, it's going to give you 45% increased multiplicative crit damage for your earth skills. However, the way that you need to take advantage of this is basically you just have to press Wind Shear every once in a while, and then you have this buff up for 4 seconds, which is a 45% crit damage multi, which ends up being a little bit less damage than the Shepherd's Legendary. The reason that I don't like this is because every time that you go to press Wind Shear, you're going to take yourself out of bear form, and when you're not in bear form, you have significantly less armor, so I found myself getting one-shotted a lot doing that. You will take yourself out of bear form quite often pressing Blood Howl and Poison Creeper, etc., but it felt very clunky doing that while also pressing a basic skill every 4 seconds, and I just kept getting myself killed that way. And there's also some additional benefits of having companions, such as Poison Creeper poison stuff, so you get Envenom 30% multiplicative damage increase. The wolves are literally useless. Ravens, you get 8% crit chance every once in a while, so that's decent. But if you wanted to, you could just not play with this legendary at all and not take advantage of this damage, and you could play with natural balance. And the benefit of natural balance is that you can use a skill such as trample or such as debilitating roar for some more survivability. But this is what I've landed on as being overall pretty good, because I just like the damage being active all of the time. When it comes to the skill tree, I'll have variations of the build in the description down below, as well as a boss killing version if you're interested. But when it comes to the skill tree, throw random points into Wind Shear. We get this for additional increased damage. We max out Pulverize, and then Pulverize has a survivability issue, which is kind of weird on Druid, but for whatever reason, you just don't get a ton of DR, so getting Primal Pulverize is very good. Getting Predatory Instincts for crit and Iron Fur for damage reduction is very strong. Max out the Resist here, which is nice. 15% DR after you use a defensive skill, which is why having at least 1 defensive skill I think is mandatory, and that's going to be our Blood Howl. Blood Howl you can realistically use almost every 6 seconds because getting a kill reduces its cooldown, so you can pretty much spam this for the heal as well as the guaranteed spirit generation. And then we just put all the companion abilities on our bar. They don't actually do anything other than just kind of being there for the damage multiplier. And then we upgrade Ravens for the additional 2 Ravens, which is just 20% increased damage. Keep in mind, though, the companions literally suck balls, and if you don't want to have the additional damage, I mean, it's 60% damage, which is pretty significant, but if you wanted to play the Wind Shear version of the build, feel free to do that, and then you could incorporate some more damage reduction through Aspect of Might paired with it. Mending, and then 3 points into Provocation for the guaranteed overpower, and then I have 1 into Crushing Earth. We aren't really slowing stuff, so that's fine, and then 3 into Stone Guard, so we get extra damage. I have 2 into Safeguard, which is pretty good. It is base life Fortify, but you do crit quite a lot. This just helps with your Fortify uptime, and your Fortify is a lot of your damage reduction. Almost all of your damage reduction is built into being fortified, and this also increases your damage with Overpower. So I found that this just helps round out the consistency with both survivability and damage, just having higher uptime on Fortify, but it is kind of optional. I went into Envenom here. This says it's additive, but it is actually multiplicative crit damage. The only way that we are poisoning stuff is with Poison Creeper. I am pretty much only using this for elites and for bosses. You could argue it's not good to put 4 points, almost 5, so that you can get this additional damage. You could definitely argue to take Poison Creeper off, because only 10% damage for the Legendary as a companion, and you could go into Debilitating Roar for survivability, and just ditch Envenom entirely, but I like doing big numbers, so feel free to swap that around depending on your preference. And without these 4 points, you could max out like Debilitating Roar for the Fortify and the heal, or you could even go into something like Circle of Life for straight up more healing. Next, I have Petrify, which is again just for bosses. You could alternatively take this off for the same reason that you might want to take Envenom off, just to get some more survivability or something. But 50% increased damage against bosses is very nice, especially against very high health elites. You don't need to upgrade it because it doesn't really help you at all. Defiance is just for damage. Natural Disaster is also for damage. And then Quick Shift is also for damage, but this is also optional if you wanted some more healing or Fortified Gen. Feel free. It's just 15% increased damage anytime you turn into Pulverize or turn into Bear Form, which you'll do constantly because you're constantly pressing Blood Howl. And every once in a while, you may want to press Poison Creeper. So shapeshifting back in counts for 15% damage. I am mainly using this as well as Envenom just so I can do even more damage against bosses. One benefit of using the different legendary where you want to be pressing Wind Shear for the damage increase is that you get a higher benefit out of Resonance, giving you an up to 18% increased damage, but only for the first skill after you cast Wind Shear. And again, when you cast Wind Shear, it takes you out of Bear Form and you lose all the armor here, which means you're pretty much going to die if you get meleeed or auto-attacked by anything when you're not in bear form. When it comes to our vampire powers, there's also some alternatives here with you guys. I'm going to be pretty diligent, so feel free to just skip around and just look at the build link if you just want to know what I'm using. But I landed on using Hemomancy. This actually isn't good for the damage that it does. It's very good getting up to level 100, but in like a tier 100 Nightmare Dungeon, the amount of damage this does is extremely insignificant. The reason that I like Hemomancy is because it heals for each enemy that you hit, but also Pulverize has this problem where when you're using the exploit glyph for vulnerable application, your first hit of Pulverize on an enemy that makes them vulnerable, this first hit that you deal is not going to benefit from the vulnerable damage multiplier because they aren't going to be vulnerable until they get hit for the first time. But when you use Hemomancy, Hemomancy will deal the damage first, therefore making them vulnerable, so your first hit of Pulverize will make them vulnerable, or will be benefiting from that vulnerable damage, which means you will more often than not be one-shotting stuff when you overpower, where otherwise you'd be missing on like 40% plus, like 50% almost, multiplicative damage. So that is why Hemomancy is good, and the healing is pretty good. I replaced Undying for it. Blood Boil is good for the guaranteed overpower. Sanguine Brace, I think, is mandatory. You get a lot of Fortify, and it's 8% crit chance when you have Fortify up, and you want to have as much crit chance as possible with the build. Prey on the Weak is quite good for an additional 16% increased damage against vulnerable enemies, but it's only 16% and you lose a bit of defense using this. Metamorphosis is mandatory because of Tybalt's Will, and we need that for our spirit generation. Talk about that in a second. Instead of Prey on the Weak, you could use Undying here for more healing. You could use, for a while I was using Ravenous. Ravenous felt very good. I can't ever find these, dude. I don't know if it's just me. Let me know in the comments if I'm just like a dumbass and it's literally impossible for me to remember where any of these are, or if yeah, I'm just stupid. But I wish there was a way to sort it or something, but I'm just dumb. Anyways, Ravenous I would like instead of Prey on the Weak a lot of the time, but I do like having the extra damage there, but the attack speed does feel pretty good. Resilience is good for damage reduction, but ultimately not super necessary in the end, and having damage ends up being pretty good. When it comes to Spirit, Spirit is a pretty big problem with this build. One of the ways that you can solve the Spirit guaranteed is by using a Ring of the Umbral as well as the legendary aspect that your Earth skills crowd control enemies. That pretty much solves your Spirit, but you lose quite a lot of damage, upwards of 40. You'd probably lose this legendary 40% damage to be able to do that. It ends up not being necessary when you have the build perfectly set up, and your spirit generation is basically stacking resource generation on your gear using Tybalt's Will paired with Metamorphosis, and you do not want to level up Metamorphosis because leveling it up makes it significantly worse because you get less uptime on the additional resource, because you get the resource when you become unstoppable, and leveling it up makes it every 4 seconds rather than every 2 seconds that you could be dodging. So do not level this up, that bricks it. But basically you scale your resource gen and then you dash around a lot. You get a lot of the resource from Tybalt's Will. You get a lot of resource every time that you press Blood Howl. It'll give you 20 spirit, and also you get a lot of resource by spamming not spamming, but specking spirit on kill in the Paragon board here, as well as getting some maximum spirit, and your spirit should be pretty good. You also get some spirit cost reduction here with the Inner Beast, which is nice, and that's another reason why using Blood Howl is very good, because you get 30% spirit cost reduction. So as you can see, if I just spacebar, I get nearly full spirit, and this is with min rolled resource gen on all of my rolls, and I'm not able to spam it because my Metamorphosis is level 3. but also using Blood Howl, which you'll be able to constantly do because just getting a kill will reduce the cooldown. That pretty much solves your spirit by itself, and you attack pretty slowly with the build as well. So if you just make sure to, dash around, etc., you're going to be perfectly fine with your spirit. Every once in a while, it can feel kind of bad, but as long as you're making sure to just spacebar enough and also use your Blood Howl pretty much on cooldown, you should be perfectly fine. But again, feel free to go into Umbral plus that other aspect I mentioned if you are having a miserable time. Another way I'm getting a little bit of resource is with a Lucky Hit, chance to restore a resource. This is very good when there's like a ton of mobs, but against bosses and stuff, it's like never going to proc, and it doesn't give you a ton, but it is helpful overall. When it comes to your gear, I would not recommend doing this build without Banished Lord's Talisman and without Tybalt's Will. These really make it kind of work, so definitely just go and get these. If you just kill Duriel a few times, you're pretty much guaranteed to get it. Insatiable Fury is unbelievably insane, and we are entirely relying on this to reach our armor cap. As you can see, when we are not in werewolf form, we do not have nearly enough armor, and when we are in werewolf form, we get 70% increase, which gets us over the 13,300 that we need for Nightmare Dungeons. Outside of that, let's just go over the gear and the legendary. So on the helmet, I'm using a helmet with armor. Max HP, all stats is very good. Ranks of Poison Creeper is pretty bad. Outside of that, I'd like to have willpower. Cooldown reduction is not really necessary. And when I have Fortify, my Earth skills gain 2 ranks, so that I deal increased damage with Pulverize. If you're using Wind Shear with this legendary, you would want to put on Aspect of Might for 20% damage reduction. You may ask, why do I not use Godslayer Crown? The reason is that I actually swapped to this on bosses to do more damage, but when I put Godslayer Crown on, I lose the total armor percent, and I lose the +2 ranks, which is just overall better for like more consistency. Godslayer Crown is very good when you're doing like lower dungeons and you don't need 13,000 armor. The damage increase is pretty good, but overall I like having a more consistent option. Obviously Insatiable Fury, like I mentioned, is very good. 3 ranks to Pulverize, you get damage reduction from Fortified, and you get that armor. Very, very nice. And then I have gloves here with, you want crit chance, ranks to Pulverize, probably attack speed instead of willpower, and then Lucky Hit, chance to restore a resource, or you can get the willpower. I found that to be pretty good. And you want to turn Pulverize into an Earth skill because there's a lot of synergies with it being an Earth skill. Tybalt's Will is pretty much mandatory, 40% increased damage, and it is a massive source of your spirit generation. On your boots, you want attacks reduce evade cooldown or maximum evade charges, up to you. And I would prefer to get movement speed after killing an elite, and then you can get willpower or all stats. Damage reduction while injured is okay, but not great. And you want Ghostwalker aspect because you're constantly unstoppable for the 25% increased movement speed. For your weapon, you want to have a staff because damage of crowd control turns into a multiplicative damage increase via this node, the Earthern Devastation node. So this ends up being a pretty good increase in damage. But the main thing that you want to get is willpower, all stats, overpower damage. That's the most important. And then you can additionally get a damage to crowd controlled roll, which I don't have, but I was able to nearly cap it out anyways, which ended up being pretty fine. On your rings, you want crit chance, damage to crowd controlled, max HP, resource gen. You want this roll. Getting the crit chance is very important. Damage to crowd controlled again turns into the multiplicative bonus. Resource gen is very important because it's going to scale up how much resource you get from Blood Howl, how much resource you get from Tybalt's, and also how much resource you get when you actually get kills for the Spirit on Kill. My rolls are really low and you can feel it. The difference between having max rolled resource and low is pretty significant, but when you get like a metamorphosis at level 1 and you're spamming your spacebar, your resource is going to feel really, really good if you have maxed out resource gen rolls on these pieces. If you have a Shaco, I would recommend using that and trying to make up for the total armor percent that you were losing via the Paragon board, as well as pretty much just the Paragon board is how you're going to make up for that loss of armor, but you get the 20% damage reduction, you get max HP, it ends up being pretty good. Then for the amulet, you want Banished Lord's Talisman. Try to get as high of a crit chance roll and as high of a resource gen roll as possible. The overpower damage roll isn't all that big of a deal. I never mentioned Spirit Boons, but this is real quick. 10% DR from elites, max HP, Scythe Talons for crit chance. This crit damage is additive, so it's really terrible. Attack speed is good, but it's not better than crit chance. Fortify for 15% when you use a defensive skill is very good because you're spamming Blood Howl all the time. The amount of resource that you get from Energize is complete trash. And then Obsidian Slam is pretty much mandatory because it gives you extra overpowers. When it comes to the Paragon board, I've messed with this quite a bit. I pretty much copied the Maxroll one and then ended up making quite a lot of changes to it. But shout out Boilerup for posting that because it actually is a pretty good board, and there's a lot of nodes in here that are pretty good, so I'll go over all of them. I made sure to just get resistance cap. I'm a little over capped right now, unfortunately, but it's kind of just how it is with the glyph situation. So let's get into it. First off, I have Shapeshifter so that I have 20% increased crit chance anytime you have a skill that shapeshifts you. So for example, if I am in Blood Howl and I'm werewolf form or I'm human form, my next skill is going to have 20% crit. This is very good because I'm constantly spamming the Blood Howl as well as Poison Creeper on bosses. So I pretty much have 20% increased crit chance, and I want to crit because of Banished Lord's Talisman. So that's a really good glyph to have. It also buffs the resistances, so you can get that guaranteed maxed out resist. Next glyph, you want to max out Dominate for as much overpower damage as possible, and then you gain Inner Beast for 30% spirit cost reduction, which is fantastic. You want to make sure to be pressing Blood Howl on cooldown for this because it gives you the stacks of the spirit cost reduction. If you're not pressing it on cooldown, you're going to lose the spirit cost reduction, which is imperative to you being able to have enough spirit to actually press stuff. Then I get a lot of armor, max HP. This stuff is pretty bad. You could probably path this a little bit better. Not sure. Ancestral Guidance is amazing. 75 spirit for 30% increased damage. You get a lot of the spirit on kill, max HP here, max spirit, which is pretty nice. Then I have Undaunted for 10% damage reduction. This build has a survivability issue, so the 10% DR there is quite nice. And then I get Werebear for another 10% DR. I get the Damage of Crowd Controlled, which turns into the Earthen Devastation. I maxed it out because I don't have Damage of Crowd Controlled on my staff. If I did have it on my staff, then I could drop it on one ring and then drop 2 nodes here. Get the resistance here as well as the damage taken over time reduction. I'm actually capped out on resistance right now. I might end up making some alterations to the Paragon board if I can, but it's just a few points to get the damage taken reduction, so whatever. Then I get some damage reduction while fortified, some overpower damage here, and then some total armor while in Werebear, which is nice. And then I get exploit, so we're making enemies vulnerable. That's pretty much it for the Paragon board. When it comes to actually playing with the build, it's pretty easy to play with. The only thing I'd make sure to do is try to use your Blood Howl often, but don't use it when there's like 5,000 mobs on top of you because it's going to take you into werewolf form, which means you're going to lose the armor from being in Werebear, which means you're probably going to die. Otherwise, all you need to do is make sure to just spacebar every 4 seconds or when you feel like you don't have enough resource and press your Pulverize button. If there's a big elite, you can use your Petrify, and if there's a boss, you can use Poison Creeper and stuff for the additional damage via Envenom. But otherwise, yeah, you pretty much just spam right-click, and it's pretty easy to play with. And you're doing T100 Nightmare Dungeons, sometimes things can be a little scary because the build definitely lacks on defense. And there's not really a lot of ways you can fix that. You'd have to like ditch to Balts, and then if you ditch to Balts, you have to fix your resource with Umbral and the other aspect. And then you're losing like, you literally just lost 100% multiplicative damage, and then you fix your survivability, but now you're in a situation where you can't kill stuff. So you kind of just have to deal with it like this. This build is kind of like offense is the best defense. You do get a good bit of defense with a ton of max HP, fortify, etc., but you don't have like a crazy amount of flat damage reduction like other builds do. So you need to rely on your damage quite a bit, but you do a lot of damage, and it's quite a lot of fun to play with. When it comes to actually fighting bosses, how you want to approach them, if you want to pretty much guarantee a one-shot, I'd recommend swapping to Godslayer Crown. Make sure you have Petrify up. You want to walk up to them, spacebar to apply Vulnerable with Prey on the Weak, and also to get the damage multi, petrify them, and then press Poison Creeper for the 20% crit chance, and then you should have a almost like 80-90% crit chance, and then you will pulverize, and then you'll have all of your crit damage multipliers, and you should hit for like 30 to 40 mil with the build set up pretty well. And you just press Pulverize again. You should have 2 guaranteed overpowers stacked up from Blood Boil, as well as the Provocation, and pretty much any boss should just die as a result of that. I'll have a boss killing version of the build if you want to just cheese as much boss damage as humanly possible, but the normal version that I was playing with in all of the gameplay and that I showed you when I was looking at the gear is what I used in these boss killing clips. So it's not really necessary to stack up a lot of additional boss damage unless you want to hit for a really big number like this on Lilith or something. That's pretty much it for the build. I will be making a Tornado one, as I do think Tornado will end up being better for actually doing the Abattoir of Zir, because it doesn't lack as much defense, and also Pulverize has a bossing problem. When bosses have 5 times more HP than they do right now, Pulverize is not going to have a good time, but Tornado will be perfectly fine, I think, so I'm going to end up making that. But this is definitely a fantastic build, and you can definitely clear Abattoir of Zir with it. You probably just can't do like the highest difficulty of it. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments. Spent a pretty good amount of time on it, so hopefully you guys do enjoy the video and the build. And yeah, I'll see you guys later. Have a good one. Peace.